This is an introduction to inequalities. So what we're going to be talking about are what inequalities are, some examples of them, and we're going to be talking about number lines and then how to graph inequalities. So what are inequalities? So as the name suggests, it's when two sides of an equation aren't equal. And these are represented with signs as shown here. These can be x is greater than y. This one is x is less than y. And then when it has a bar under it, it would mean x is greater than or equal to y, and x is less than or equal to y. An easy way of remembering which sign and when to use it is that the mouth eats the bigger number. So over here, you would put, for example, the bigger number here and the small number here. So some examples of inequalities are, for example, x is bigger than 5, and x cannot equal 4 or 5, for example. And x, for example, can equal 5.01 or 6 or 7 or 8, as these numbers are bigger than 5. So over here we have a second one where it's y is bigger than or equal to, in this case, 6x minus 17. So for this one, if we set x is equal to 1, we can find that y cannot equal to negative 12 or negative 20. This is because if x is 1, then that means that y has to be bigger or equal to negative 11. However, you can see that y can equal to negative 11 in this case because unlike here, this one has this little bar which means or equal to, or 0 which is bigger than negative 11. This can also be visually shown. For example, we can have x is bigger than or equal to 7. And using a number line, we can see that we have a solid dot. And you can see that any number after 7, represented by this arrow, is allowed. For example, you can see that 8 is part of this number line, and 8 is bigger than 7. And instead of having a solid dot, if you have only greater than or only less than, for example, x is bigger than 5, you have to have what we call a hole instead of this solid dot. So that means that x cannot equal to 5 in this specific point. However, any number after 5 in this direction is alright. So graphing and how to graph a linear inequality. So some steps to remember is, firstly, you would just graph the line as normal, as if you don't have the inequality sign. And some things to remember is that if it's bigger or equal to or less than and equal to, it creates a solid line, but otherwise you would have to make the line dotted. And secondly, you would test it with a point outside of the line to see which side of the line is going to be shaded, which I'm going to be explaining more later. So for example, if you have the line y is bigger than or equal to 6x minus 17, we can see that it makes this line over here. And we're going to have a test point 5, 5, negative 15, which is shown here. So what do you do after that? Well, we would have to check, does the point satisfy the equation? So then we would sub in 5, 15 into this equation. And then after some simple math, we can find that we would get negative 15 is bigger than or equal to 13 in this case, which obviously we see that it does not work and it doesn't make sense. Therefore, this dot, this point doesn't include in this inequality. Therefore, we know that this side doesn't work. then the opposite side has to be shaded, as any point to the left of this line would work. And then let's say if this point does check out, it does satisfy, and that means that that point, that side would work. So that concludes our inequalities lesson, where we talked about what inequalities are and some examples of them, and then we showed you how to graph linear equations that have inequalities.